Silas was a whisper in the wind, a shadow amongst the Joshua trees. He moved with a quiet grace learned from years of solitary living on the sprawling ranch. His calloused hands, etched with the map of his life, told stories he could never voice. He knew the land like the back of his hand, each arroyo, each sun-baked rock, a familiar friend. He could feel the coming rain in the ache of his joints and smell the change in the wind that heralded the scorching summer months. His days were a rhythm of sun and soil. He mended fences under the watchful gaze of hawks circling overhead. He watered the thirsty cattle, the creak of the windmill a lonely song in the vast expanse. Evenings were spent watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, a silent symphony of color that soothed his soul. He found solace in the land's stark beauty, a beauty that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. Silas communicated through action and observation. A slight tilt of his head could convey curiosity, a furrow of his brow, concern. His eyes, the color of the desert sky after a storm, held a depth of understanding that transcended spoken language. Folks in the nearby town, those few he encountered, knew him as that mute fella from the ranch, often dismissing him as simple. But Silas was anything but. He was a keen observer, a student of nature, his senses sharpened by years of silence. He noticed the subtle shifts in the desert ecosystem, the blooming of cacti after a rare rain, the tracks of coyotes in the sand, and the precise location of the sun and stars at any given time. His small cabin, built from sun-baked adobe bricks, was his sanctuary. Inside, the air was cool and dry, smelling of earth and wood smoke. A worn map of the constellations hung above his bed, a testament to his fascination with the night sky. He often spent hours outside, gazing at the stars, feeling a sense of connection to something vast and ancient. He felt at peace under the stars, and it was this peace that he hoped to share when the unexpected happened, forever changing his solitary existence. The stagecoach arrived one sweltering afternoon, bringing with it a small, frightened girl with eyes that saw nothing, a deaf orphan named Lily. Lily clung to the rough fabric of her dress, her knuckles white. The dust of the journey coated her face, streaking down her cheeks where tears had carved paths. She didn't understand why she was here in this strange, silent place. The sounds of the stagecoach, the rumble of the wheels, the snorting of the horses, all gone. Now only silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed in on her from all sides. Silas watched her from the porch, his expression unreadable. He'd been given no instructions, just a curt, "She's your responsibility now," from the departing stage driver. He knew nothing about children, let alone a deaf one. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. He knelt, placing himself at her level, and extended a hand, palm up, a gesture of peace. Lily flinched, drawing back. He could feel her fear radiating outwards. He retracted his hand, understanding. He pointed to himself, then to the cabin, then mimed eating. He hoped she understood. The first few days were a struggle. Lily was withdrawn and wary, her eyes darting around nervously. She wouldn't meet Silas's gaze, wouldn't accept food from his hand. He tried to communicate through gestures, drawing pictures in the dirt, but she seemed lost, trapped in her own silent world. He learned to anticipate her needs, watching her closely, noticing the slightest changes in her expression. He discovered she was drawn to patterns, the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves of the cottonwood tree, the intricate designs in the woven blankets. One afternoon, he found her tracing the lines of the constellations on his map. An idea sparked in his mind. He took her outside as dusk began to settle, the first stars beginning to prick the darkening sky. He pointed to the brightest star, then drew its shape in the dirt, connecting the dots with his finger. He took her hand and guided it over the lines, letting her feel the shape. He repeated the process with other constellations, patiently showing her the patterns, the stories written in the stars. Slowly, tentatively, Lily began to respond. She started to mimic his gestures, to trace the shapes in the dirt herself. A flicker of understanding lit her eyes. It was a small spark, but it was enough. Silas knew in that moment that they could find a way to communicate, to bridge the gap between their silent worlds. It would take time, patience, and a whole lot of trust, but he was willing to try, for Lily and perhaps for himself as well. He felt something in his chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a connection. And in the quiet of the desert evening, under the watchful eyes of the stars, a bond began to form. The desert sun became their classroom. Silas taught Lily how to tell time by its position, how to find north by the shadows it cast. He showed her how the sun felt on her skin, warm and comforting in the morning, blazing and intense at midday, a gentle heat as it dipped towards the horizon. He'd draw a line in the sand, marking the sun's path, explaining with gestures and drawings how it moved across the sky each day. Lily, in turn, would touch the sand, feeling the warmth, her brow furrowed in concentration. He taught her about the wind, too, how it shifted direction throughout the day, how it carried the scent of rain from miles away. He'd hold up a handful of sand, letting it trickle through his fingers, showing her how the wind shaped the dunes, carving them into ever-changing sculptures. Lily would close her eyes, feeling the wind on her face, the fine grains of sand brushing against her skin, learning to interpret its whispers. But it was the stars that truly captivated them both. Night after night, they would lie on their backs, gazing at the vast expanse of the night sky. Silas would point out constellations, tracing their shapes with his finger, telling stories of ancient heroes and mythical creatures. He taught her the names of the brightest stars, showing her how they could be used to navigate, to find their way even in the darkest night. He'd explain, using simple drawings and gestures, how the North Star remained Arabic Thet, Arabic Halif, Arabic Ba, Arabic Ta, a constant guide in the ever-changing sky. Lily learned quickly, her fingers tracing the patterns in the air, her eyes sparkling with understanding. She would mimic Silas's gestures, pointing out constellations herself, her small hand reaching towards the heavens. She began to anticipate his lessons, bringing him smooth stones to draw on, collecting feathers to use as pointers. Silas realized that Lily's deafness wasn't a limitation, but a different way of experiencing the world. Her other senses were heightened, her ability to observe and interpret nonverbal cues remarkable. She felt the vibrations of the earth, sensed the approach of animals long before Silas could see them, and noticed the subtle changes in the air pressure that signaled a shift in the weather. She saw the world in a way that Silas never could, and he, in turn, was learning to see it through her eyes. Their lessons weren't just about navigation. They were about connection, about sharing their unique perspectives, about learning from each other in the silence of the desert. The sun and stars were their teachers, and their growing bond was the most important lesson of all. Their days settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings began with the smell of wood smoke and the feel of cool adobe beneath their bare feet. Silas would milk the cow, the rhythmic squeezing a silent melody, and Lily would help him gather eggs, her small hands carefully cradling the warm shells. They ate breakfast together in comfortable silence, sharing simple meals of beans, tortillas, and fresh milk. Chores became shared experiences, opportunities for communication and connection. Silas would show Lily how to mend fences, guiding her hands to secure the wire, feeling the tension and strength needed to hold the posts in place. She, in turn, would help him tend the garden, her fingers gently weeding around the delicate plants, sensing the moisture in the soil. Evenings were reserved for stories under the stars. Silas would use his hands to act out tales of brave warriors and cunning animals, his expressions animated and engaging. Lily would watch, her eyes wide with wonder, sometimes laughing silently at his exaggerated gestures. He learned to incorporate her observations into his stories, weaving in details about the desert creatures she had sensed, but he had not seen. Their communication evolved beyond simple gestures. They developed a series of tactile signals, a language of touch. A gentle squeeze of the hand meant be careful. A tap on the shoulder meant look. A tracing of a circle on her palm meant sun. Lily, with her sensitive fingertips, could distinguish between different textures and vibrations, allowing for a more nuanced exchange of information. She could feel Silas's emotions through his touch, sensing his joy, his concern, his quiet strength. They found comfort in their shared silence. It wasn't an empty silence, but a rich, vibrant space filled with understanding and unspoken emotions. They could sit together for hours without uttering a word, content in each other's presence, connected by a bond that transcended language. Silas realized that he had never felt so understood, so accepted as he did with Lily. She saw him not as the mute fella the townspeople perceived, but as the man he truly was, a man of the earth, a man of quiet strength and unwavering kindness. And Lily, in turn, had found a home, a family, a sense of belonging in the vast, silent landscape. Their unconventional family thrived in the quiet spaces, connected not by spoken words, but by the shared language of touch, observation, and the silent beauty of the desert. The dust devils danced on the horizon, swirling columns of sand that writhed and twisted like restless spirits. Silas watched them with a practiced eye, a knot forming in his stomach. The air felt heavy, charged with an unnatural stillness. The cattle were restless, huddled together near the watering hole, their low moans a mournful chorus. Even the birds were silent, seeking shelter in the sparse vegetation. Lily, sensing Silas's unease, tugged at his sleeve. He looked down at her, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He placed his hand on her shoulder, a reassuring gesture, but the knot in his stomach tightened. He knew what was coming. Later that afternoon, a wagon train appeared on the horizon, a string of covered wagons silhouetted against the setting sun. They looked weary and travel-worn, their progress slow and labored. Silas watched them approach, his gaze fixed on the lead wagon. He could see the driver slumped in his seat, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. As the wagon train drew closer, Silas could hear the faint cries of children and the tired voices of adults. They were clearly lost and desperate. The wagon master, a burly man with a weathered face, approached Silas, his eyes pleading for help. "We've lost our way," he said, his voice hoarse. "We're running low on water and supplies. Can you help us?" Silas hesitated. He was a solitary man, unaccustomed to dealing with strangers. But he couldn't ignore their plight. He looked at Lily, her eyes filled with concern. He knew what he had to do. He pointed to the west, then drew a map in the dirt, showing the location of a hidden oasis, a place he had discovered years ago, a place where water flowed freely even in the driest of seasons. The wagon master's eyes lit up with hope. "Can you take us there?" he asked. "Can you lead us to water?" Silas nodded, his expression grim. He pointed to the sky, then mimed the swirling motion of a sandstorm. The wagon master's face fell. "A sandstorm," he said, his voice filled with dread. "We can't outrun a sandstorm." Silas knew that, but he also knew that they had no choice. The oasis was their only hope, their only chance of survival. He looked at Lily and she looked back at him, her eyes filled with unwavering trust. Together they would face the storm. Together they would guide the wagon train to safety. But time was running out. The storm was coming. He could feel it in the air, in the restless energy of the desert, in the growing darkness of the sky. The first tendrils of the storm arrived like ghostly fingers stretching across the sky. The wind picked up, whipping sand into a frenzy, stinging their faces and obscuring the sun. The air grew thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. The once clear horizon vanished behind a swirling curtain of brown. Silas acted quickly, gesturing for the wagon master to gather his people. He pointed to the strongest wagons, instructing them to form a circle, creating a makeshift shelter against the storm. He showed them how to cover their faces with cloths, how to protect their eyes from the stinging sand. He communicated through a combination of gestures, drawings in the dirt, and Lily's intuitive understanding. The sandstorm hit with full force, a roaring beast unleashed upon the desert. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at the wagons and whipping sand into a blinding fury. The air was thick with grit, making it almost impossible to see or breathe. The world was reduced to a swirling vortex of sand and noise, a chaotic symphony of destruction. Inside the wagon circle, the families huddled together, their faces etched with fear. The children cried, their voices barely audible above the roar of the storm. The adults tried to comfort them, but their own fear was palpable. The wagon master, his face grim, looked to Silas for guidance. Silas remained calm, his eyes scanning the horizon, searching for any sign of a break in the storm. He could feel the vibrations of the earth beneath his feet, sensing the shifts in the wind, the subtle changes in the air pressure. He knew that the oasis was their only hope, but the journey would be treacherous, a desperate race against the storm. Lily, sensing his determination, placed her hand in his. Her touch was a source of strength, a reminder of the bond they shared, a bond that could withstand even the fiercest storm. He squeezed her hand, offering a silent promise he would get them through this. As the storm raged around them, Silas prepared to lead the wagon train into the heart of the maelstrom, relying on his knowledge of the land, his understanding of the elements, and Lily's unwavering trust. The journey would be perilous, but they had no choice. Their survival depended on it. He could feel the grit of the sand between his teeth, the sting of the wind on his skin, the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. But he also felt a surge of determination, a resolve to protect these people, to lead them to safety, to guide them through the darkness and into the light. The storm raged on, but inside the wagon circle, a flicker of hope remained, fueled by Silas's unwavering courage and Lily's silent strength. The journey began as a descent into chaos. Each gust of wind was a brutal assault, each grain of sand a tiny, stinging needle. The wagons lurched and swayed, their wheels sinking into the shifting dunes. The horses, blinded and terrified, strained against their harnesses, their panicked whinnies swallowed by the roar of the storm. Visibility was near zero. The world was a swirling mass of brown, a disorienting vortex that robbed them of all sense of direction. It was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead, making navigation a perilous guessing game. Silas relied on his instincts, his knowledge of the land, and Lily's heightened senses to guide them through the storm. The sound was overwhelming. The wind howled like 1,000 wolves, a relentless, deafening roar that pounded against their eardrums. The sand shrieked as it scraped against the wagons, creating a cacophony of noise that amplified the feeling of disorientation. Even Lily, accustomed to silence, could feel the vibrations of the storm, the tremors that shook the earth and rattled her bones. The taste of sand was ever present, a gritty film that coated their tongues and filled their mouths. It was impossible to swallow, impossible to escape the constant taste of dust and despair. The smell of the storm was equally oppressive, a musty, earthy odor that filled their nostrils and suffocated their senses. The feeling of being lost was profound. The familiar landmarks had vanished, swallowed by the storm. The sun and stars were hidden behind a thick curtain of sand, leaving them with no sense of direction, no point of reference. They were adrift in a sea of sand at the mercy of the elements. Silas, despite the overwhelming chaos, remained focused. He used his body as a shield, protecting Lily from the worst of the storm. He scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of hope, any indication that they were on the right track. He could feel the doubt and fear emanating from the wagon train, but he refused to let it break him. He knew that he had to remain strong, to provide a beacon of hope in the midst of the storm. He squeezed Lily's hand, drawing strength from her unwavering trust. Together, they would navigate this storm. Together, they would find their way to safety. The journey was far from over, but as long as they had each other, they had a chance. They had to keep moving, keep fighting, keep believing that beyond the storm, there was still hope. Through brief moments when the storm lessened enough to allow the position of the sun to be guessed, Silas used all he knew about the subtle contours of the land. and what little he could discern of direction to guide the wagon train. He moved with a quiet certainty, his eyes constantly scanning the swirling sands, his senses attuned to the slightest changes in the wind and the terrain. He felt the subtle shift in the slope of the dunes beneath his feet, the change in the texture of the sand, the faint vibrations of the earth. These were his guides, his only means of navigating through the blinding storm. The wagon master, initially skeptical, watched Silas with growing respect. He couldn't understand how the mute ranch hand could possibly know where he was going in this chaos, but he had no other choice but to trust him. Desperation had eroded his doubt, replaced by a fragile hope that clung to Silas's unwavering resolve. "How can you be so sure?" the wagon master shouted over the roar of the wind, his voice strained with anxiety. "We can't see anything, we're just wandering aimlessly." Silas didn't respond with words. Instead, he pointed to the ground, then drew a series of lines in the sand, illustrating the subtle slope of the terrain. He pointed to the faint glow of the sun, barely visible through the swirling dust, indicating its approximate position. He communicated through a language of touch, gesture, and unwavering confidence. The wagon master, though still apprehensive, began to understand. He saw the way Silas moved, the way he anticipated the shifts in the wind, the way he seemed to sense the terrain beneath his feet. He realized that Silas wasn't just guessing. He was using his intimate knowledge of the land to navigate through the storm. He relayed Silas's instructions to the other members of the wagon train, urging them to stay close, to follow his lead, to trust in the mute ranch hand who seemed to be their only hope. The journey was far from easy. The wagons continued to lurch and sway, the horses struggled against the storm, and the families huddled together in fear. But Silas remained steadfast, his determination unwavering. He knew that the oasis was their only chance, and he refused to give up. He would guide them through this storm, even if it meant risking his own life. He owed it to them, and he owed it to Lily, who trusted him implicitly. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but he also felt a surge of determination, a resolve to protect these people, to lead them to safety, to guide them through the darkness and into the light. He just hoped it would be enough. Lily, no longer the frightened orphan, was now Silas's invaluable partner. She understood the gravity of the situation, the danger they were all in. Her deafness, once a perceived limitation, became their greatest asset. While the others were blinded and deafened by the storm, Lily's other senses were heightened, allowing her to perceive the world in a way that no one else could. She walked beside Silas, her bare feet sensing the subtle vibrations of the earth, detecting changes in the terrain that were invisible to the eye. She could feel the approach of obstacles long before they could be seen, sensing the pressure waves created by large rocks or sudden drops in elevation. She would tug on Silas's sleeve, alerting him to the danger, guiding him around the obstacles, ensuring that the wagons followed a safe path. She could also sense the shifts in the wind, feeling the subtle changes in direction and intensity. She would use her hands to indicate the direction of the strongest gusts, allowing Silas to brace himself and the lead horses against the force of the storm. She became their living weather vane, their silent guide through the swirling chaos. The wagon master and the other members of the wagon train watched in awe as Lily worked, her small body moving with grace and purpose, her senses attuned to the subtle nuances of the storm. They realized that she wasn't just a deaf orphan. She was a force of nature, a vital link between them and the land. Silas relied on Lily completely, trusting her instincts and her heightened senses. He knew that she was their secret weapon, their only hope of navigating through the storm. He would often stop, placing his hand on her shoulder, offering a silent word of encouragement, acknowledging her invaluable contribution. Their bond deepened during the storm, forged in the crucible of shared danger and unwavering trust. They communicated without words, their connection transcending language, their senses intertwined. They were two halves of a whole, working together in perfect harmony, guiding the wagon train through the storm, their courage and determination inspiring hope in the hearts of the weary travelers. Lily's ability to feel the subtle vibrations of the earth beneath her feet allowed her to sense the direction of travel, warning them when the wagons were straying off course. She could detect the faint tremors caused by underground springs, a sure sign that they were getting closer to the oasis. With each step, with each subtle gesture, Lily proved her worth, transforming from a vulnerable orphan into a courageous and indispensable guide. The hours blurred into an eternity of sand and wind. Each step forward was a victory, each obstacle overcome a testament to their resilience. The journey was arduous, testing their physical and emotional limits. The horses grew weary, their hooves sinking deeper into the shifting dunes. The wagons groaned and creaked, their wooden frames strained to the breaking point. The families huddled together, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. But amidst the hardship, small acts of kindness and courage emerged. A young boy shared his meager ration of water with his younger sister. A woman offered a comforting word to a distraught mother. The wagon master, his initial skepticism replaced by unwavering trust, helped Silas clear a path through a particularly difficult stretch of terrain. Silas and Lily, working together in perfect harmony, became a symbol of hope for the weary travelers. They watched in amazement as the mute ranch hand and the deaf orphan navigated through the storm, their senses intertwined, their determination unwavering. They began to understand the power of their bond, the strength that came from their shared silence, the wisdom that came from their connection to the land. Lily, sensing the exhaustion of the horses, would often stop, placing her hand on their flanks, offering a silent word of comfort. She could feel their weariness, their pain, their desperate need for rest. She would guide Silas to find patches of relatively firm ground where the horses could briefly rest, allowing them to regain their strength. Silas, in turn, would use his knowledge of the land to find small pockets of shelter, offering the families a brief respite from the relentless storm. He would show them how to huddle together, using their bodies to create a barrier against the wind and the sand. He would share his meager supply of food and water, ensuring that everyone had enough to survive. The trust between Silas, Lily, and the wagon train members grew with each passing hour. They learned to rely on each other, to support each other, to find strength in their shared struggles. They realized that they were all in this together, bound by a common goal, to survive the storm and reach the safety of the oasis. They shared stories, hopes, and fears, forming a bond that transcended language and circumstance. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the swirling sands, a sense of hope began to emerge. They were tired, exhausted, and battered by the storm, but they were still moving forward, still clinging to the belief that they would reach their destination. The oasis was still out there, a promise of water, shelter, and safety, a beacon of hope in the heart of the storm. And with Silas and Lily leading the way, they knew that they had a chance. A small chance, perhaps, but a chance nonetheless. The snapping sound cut through the roar of the wind like a gunshot. The axle of one of the wagons had broken, its wheel collapsing into the sand. The wagon lurched violently, throwing its occupants to the ground. Panic erupted within the wagon train. The wagon master, his face etched with despair, rushed to the broken wagon. He assessed the damage, shaking his head grimly. "It's hopeless," he shouted over the wind. "We can't fix it, we'll have to abandon it." Silas, sensing the desperation in the wagon master's voice, approached the broken wagon. He examined the damage, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He pointed to a nearby rocky outcropping, then gestured for the men to gather large stones. Using a combination of gestures and drawings in the sand, Silas explained his plan. They would use the stones to create a makeshift support for the broken axle, allowing the wagon to limp along until they reached the oasis. It was a risky plan, but it was their only hope. The men, their initial despair replaced by a renewed sense of purpose, worked together to gather the stones. The women tended to the injured, offering comfort and support. Even the children helped, carrying small stones to the work site. Lily, sensing the urgency of the situation, used her heightened senses to locate the largest and most stable stones. She would guide the men to the stones, ensuring that they selected the best possible materials for the repair. Working together, they managed to create a makeshift support for the broken axle. It was a crude repair, but it was enough to keep the wagon moving. The wagon master, his face lit up with gratitude, clasped Silas's hand, offering a silent word of thanks. As they prepared to continue their journey, a young girl cried out in alarm. Her younger brother, distracted by the commotion, had wandered off into the storm. Panic spread through the wagon train once again. Silas, without hesitation, grabbed a rope and tied one end around his waist. He handed the other end to the wagon master, then disappeared into the swirling sands, determined to find the lost child. Lily, sensing the urgency of the situation, followed close behind, using her heightened senses to track the child's scent and footsteps. She could feel the child's fear and desperation, guiding Silas towards his location. After what seemed like an eternity, they found the child huddled behind a large dune, shivering with cold and fear. Silas scooped him up in his arms, offering a reassuring smile. He carried the child back to the wagon train, where he was reunited with his grateful mother. The near disaster had tested their resilience and forced them to rely on each other even more. They had faced adversity with courage and determination, proving that even in the darkest of times, hope could still prevail. Their bond, forged in the crucible of shared struggle, had become unbreakable. They were no longer just a group of strangers. They were a family bound by a common purpose, united by a shared determination to survive. And with Silas and Lily leading the way, they knew that they could overcome any obstacle, endure any hardship, and reach the safety of the oasis. Their journey was far from over, but they were stronger now, more resilient, and more determined than ever before. The wind began to subside, the swirling sands slowly settling, revealing a landscape transformed. The sun, a pale disk behind the dissipating dust, cast long, distorted shadows across the dunes. The air, though still thick with grit, felt cleaner, lighter. And then they saw it. A ribbon of green in the distance, a splash of vibrant color against the muted tones of the desert. Trees, tall and graceful, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. And beyond the trees, a shimmering pool of water, reflecting the pale light of the sun. The oasis. A collective gasp swept through the wagon train, tears streamed down weary faces. Children cheered, their voices filled with joy. The horses, sensing the nearness of water, quickened their pace, their hooves drumming against the sand. Silas, his face etched with exhaustion, allowed himself a small smile. He had done it. He had guided them through the storm, through the darkness, and into the light. He looked at Lily, her eyes sparkling with excitement, her face radiant with relief. Together they had accomplished the impossible. As they approached the oasis, the families spilled out of the wagons, rushing towards the water. They knelt beside the pool, cupping their hands, drinking deeply, savoring the cool, refreshing liquid. They splashed water on their faces, washing away the grime and the despair. The oasis was a paradise, a sanctuary of life in the heart of the desert. Palm trees provided shade from the harsh sun. Birds sang sweetly from the branches. Flowers bloomed in vibrant colors. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blossoms and the sound of trickling water. The wagon train members, their bodies weary but their spirits lifted, began to set up camp. They unpacked their belongings, tending to their horses, preparing a simple meal. They shared stories of their journey, celebrating their survival, giving thanks for the oasis and for the courage and guidance of Silas and Lily. The relief was palpable, a wave of gratitude washing over the weary travelers. They had faced death and despair, but they had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more united than ever before. They had learned the importance of community, the power of hope, and the strength that could be found in the most unexpected places. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the wagon train members gathered around a crackling campfire, sharing stories, singing songs, and celebrating their newfound hope. Silas and Lily sat together, watching the scene unfold, their hearts filled with contentment. They had given these people more than just water and shelter. They had given them hope, a new beginning, a reason to believe in the goodness of humanity. And in the quiet of the desert evening, under the watchful eyes of the stars, they knew that they had made a difference. They had changed lives. They had created a family, and that was a victory worth more than all the gold in the world. The next morning, as the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the oasis, the wagon master approached Silas and Lily. His face, usually weathered and stern, was softened by gratitude. He extended his hand to Silas, clasping it firmly. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved our lives. We were lost, desperate, and without hope. You led us through that storm, guided us to safety. You are a true hero." Silas simply nodded, his eyes conveying his humility and his deep satisfaction. He didn't need words to express his feelings. The wagon master then turned to Lily, kneeling before her, his voice filled with respect. "And you, little one," he said, "you are a miracle. Your courage, your strength, your heightened senses, they were our salvation. You saw what we could not see, you felt what we could not feel. You are an angel in the desert." Lily smiled, her eyes sparkling with joy. She understood the wagon master's words, not through sound, but through the sincerity of his expression, the warmth of his gaze, the vibrations of his voice. The other members of the wagon train gathered around Silas and Lily, offering their own words of gratitude and admiration. They showered them with gifts, handmade blankets, carved wooden toys, and precious trinkets. They shared stories of how Silas and Lily had inspired them, how their courage and determination had given them the strength to endure the storm. One by one, they approached Silas, clasping his hand, offering a silent word of thanks. They looked into his eyes, seeing not the mute fellow from the ranch, but a wise and compassionate man, a true leader. They saw the depth of his connection to the land, the strength of his character, the unwavering kindness of his heart. They also approached Lily, offering her hugs, smiles, and gestures of affection. They saw not the deaf orphan, but a courageous and resourceful young woman, a vital member of their community, a beacon of hope in the desert. They saw the beauty of her spirit, the sensitivity of her soul, the unwavering strength of her will. As the wagon train prepared to leave the oasis, they gathered around Silas and Lily, offering a final farewell. They promised to never forget them, to carry their story with them, to share their message of hope and resilience with the world. The wagon master presented Silas with a finely crafted compass, a symbol of their gratitude and their enduring respect. He then presented Lily with a beautiful silver locket, a reminder of their shared journey and their unbreakable bond. With a final wave, the wagon train departed, leaving Silas and Lily alone in the peace and quiet of the oasis. But they were not truly alone. They had each other, they had their bond, and they had the knowledge that they had made a difference, that they had changed lives, that they had created a family. And that was a legacy worth more than all the riches in the world. They watched as the wagon train disappeared over the horizon, their hearts filled with a mixture of sadness and joy. They knew that they would never forget these people, that their lives had been forever intertwined. And as they turned to walk back towards their small adobe cabin, they knew that their journey was far from over. Their life together was just beginning, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together as a family. The return to the ranch was a journey of quiet reflection. The desert, washed clean by the storm, sparkled under the clear azure sky. The air smelled fresh and clean, carrying the scent of sagebrush and wildflowers. The silence, once a symbol of Silas's solitude, was now a comfortable embrace, a shared space of understanding between him and Lily. They walked hand in hand, their steps in sync, their hearts connected. The compass, a gift from the wagon master, swung gently from Silas's belt, a constant reminder of their adventure. The silver locket, a treasure for Lily, warmed against her skin, a reminder of the unbreakable bond they had forged. Back at the ranch, life resumed its familiar rhythm. The windmill creaked, the cattle lowed, the birds sang. Silas mended fences, watered the garden, and tended to the animals. Lily helped him with his chores, her senses attuned to the subtle changes in the environment, but something had changed. The ranch no longer felt like a place of solitude, but a haven of love and belonging. Silas was no longer a lonely mute ranch hand, but a guardian, a teacher, a father figure. Lily was no longer a frightened deaf orphan, but a courageous and resourceful young woman, a vital part of their unconventional family. Evenings were spent under the stars, sharing stories and dreams. Silas taught Lily more about the constellations, showing her how to use the compass to navigate, how to find her way even in the darkest night. Lily, in turn, taught Silas more about the vibrations of the earth, showing him how to sense the approach of animals, how to predict the weather. They built a small swing set under the cottonwood tree, a place where Lily could play and laugh and feel the joy of childhood. They adopted a stray dog, a loyal companion who followed them everywhere, sensing their emotions, offering unconditional love. They often sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, their silence filled with understanding and contentment. They had found peace in the desert, a sense of belonging, a connection that transcended words. They were a family bound not by blood but by love, by shared experiences, and by a deep respect for each other and for the land. Years passed, and Lily grew into a beautiful and intelligent young woman. She never forgot the lessons she had learned from Silas, the wisdom he had shared, the love he had given. She remained his constant companion, his loyal friend, his devoted daughter. And Silas, in turn, never forgot the day Lily arrived at the ranch, the day his solitary life was forever changed. He had found purpose in caring for her, joy in sharing his knowledge, and love in their unbreakable bond. In the end, their story was not just about a mute ranch hand and a deaf orphan, but about the power of connection, the importance of community, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. It was a story about finding hope in the darkest of times, about overcoming adversity with courage and determination, and about creating a family in the most unexpected of places. And as they sat together on the porch, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, they knew that their story would live on, inspiring others to believe in the power of love, the beauty of silence, and the magic of the desert.